Hi, I'm State Senator Pat Jehlen, and this is the Pat Jehlen Show. And today we're going to be talking about transportation issues facing our communities in the Commonwealth. Particularly right now, a lot of people are worried about what's happening to public transit with the proposed service cuts and fare increases. And we're also probably going to talk about the Green Line extension and possibly other transportation topics. I'm really lucky to be joined here today by two wonderful and knowledgeable guests who will talk about these things with us. One is my colleague, Representative Carl Shortino, who's from Medford. He was first elected to the House in 2005. He's a founder of the MBTA caucus in the legislature, a member of the Transportation Committee, and a big supporter of the Green Line extension and preserving affordable, accessible transportation. And Ken Kraus is at every meeting I've ever been at, and most of the other ones. He's also from Medford. He helped organize and found the Medford Green Line Neighborhood Alliance, which is a group of citizens who support the proposed Green Line extension, and have done a lot of organizing around that. So thank you both for joining us. I'd like to start out by just asking you, how do you get around? What are your favorite methods of getting around?
Well, I'm a multimodal transportation person. I get around by walking, bicycling. I take the bus service from Medford. I take the Red Line and the Orange Line and the commuter rail, and I also drive. So I have a perspective of a user of all those modes.
You fly?
Occasionally.
To work?
How about you, Carl?
I wish I could say I was quite as good as Ken. I don't generally bike because I'm a little lazier than that, I suppose. But I do. I don't own a car. I tend to use the MBTA to get everywhere that I go. I take the 96 bus from the hillsides to get to Davis Square and take the Red Line into work. And when I need to get around the neighborhoods, I either take the buses or, like today to get here, I took a zip car. So I try to limit my driving because I really don't like cars. If I can avoid them, I do.
Great. Well, I'm not as good at getting around as you are. I usually use my car or I walk to the subway.
But cannot be perfect.
My best trip is with my granddaughters when we want to go to the mall. We get in our canoe on the Somerville side of the river and canoe across to eat at Old Country Buffet. So
wow, that's terrific.
That's my most unusual
river transportation.
trip. So I want to start with the proposed fare hikes and service cuts, and they will affect all of our district, both with the commuter rail and the bus lines and the ride and the Red Line and the Green Line. So let's talk about why those things are important, why hundreds of people are showing up at every one of, how many hearings are there being for the MBTA?
There's well over 20. They've been adding more as they've gone out the process as well.
And we've added one last night, or 2 nights ago in Medford. The Medford delegation added an extra one. But at every single one of those meetings, hundreds of people are showing up. And why do you think that is happening? Why is this pulling out more people than I've ever seen about any issue since I've been in office?
Well, I think partly it's because of the drasticness of the cuts that would, in some instances, completely cut off people from access to their jobs, particularly North Medford if they eliminate the 2 bus lines that serve that area. So people are just in a quandary of what they would do to actually get to work and other places. And the other thing I think that's been interesting is that while there's been unanimity in outrage to these cuts, no one has been of an opinion that these need to be done. So I think it's brought a lot of different forces in the community together that may not have been aligned on this issue before. I think people are realizing, even if you don't take public transportation, the impacts that it will have if these services are not available, I think they'll be broadly felt.
You want to talk about that? What are some things that would affect other people who never take the subway or the bus?
Well, when we were at the Medford meeting, there was about 300 people that showed up, and the most common word that I heard that night was lifeline. You know, people were talking about the T as their lifeline to get to their jobs, to doctors, just to be a part of the community. And for the people that don't use the T as their lifeline, they'll have a lot more drivers on the roads. For people that can afford to buy a car, if they lose their bus and they can get a car, they will, because it's the only way they can get around. And for many people, they don't even have that option if they can't afford to get a car. It's not within their family's means. And so it's a real problem for a lot of people, whether they use the T or not. But the T is sort of the agency that people love to hate. We love to bash the T. We love to say how miserable it is and all the things that are wrong with it. But when people are faced with the choice of losing that service, it's pretty impressive how many people have shown up to say, as much as I love to hate it, I need it. It's my lifeline.
Well, I think it's not just people. I went to a meeting of A Better City, which is a group of big institutions in Boston, large employers, and they are really worried about the effect not just on their employees and their clients and consumers, but that they themselves will have a very hard time getting their employees to work, especially like on the weekends. If there's no service, people in Winchester won't have any commuter rail at all, no matter how much they pay.
What's frightening to me, actually, despite how many people are showing up to these hearings, is a lot of people don't know yet that their bus is on the docket to be cut. I was talking to a friend yesterday who lives downtown, and he said, yeah, that's too bad. I can pay a little bit more, but I'm just glad my bus isn't touched. I'm downtown Boston. And I said, aren't you on the 43 bus? That's gone. And suddenly he was in panic mode and calling his friends who are on the same bus. And even as this is unfolding, people are just learning what the impact is and starting to take stock of how much they value the T service.
Yeah. And I'm thinking of another, the Woburn Business Association has organized a lot of emails because people who go to work in Woburn are very affected. Kendall Square, the businesses are very worried about the value of their property anymore. If they can't get their business there, then they will lose the value of that property and they will have to move, or they won't be able to get workers. People have said, you were talking about North Medford, people have said, I'm going to either have to buy a car or sell my house. The value of my property is going down. I just bought my house because it was on the line. So it is very perturbing. But why are we in this situation? If nobody wants to be here, why are we here?
Because the T is broke, right? There was a great article in the Boston Globe magazine last year. If people can find it online, it's worth pulling up, and it has a history of the T's finances going back to forward funding in 2000. And without getting too wonky, it's basically in the
forward funding.
Forward funding. So
nobody knows what that is.
No one knows what that is. They don't need to accept to know that since 2000, the plan that was set out by the legislature to fund the T hasn't worked, mostly because the sales tax revenue hasn't come through with internet sales and 2 recessions. The energy prices have gone up dramatically, which every household has seen. The T is the biggest gobbler of energy in the state. They're the biggest consumer of energy. With those 2 things alone, they've not been able to meet their budget with the revenue that they have. So they've been adding on more debt that they already had. So right now, about 30% of the budget goes to paying off debt.
Which is not a good plan. You wouldn't like to have your own household budget 30% going to debt. And I think that's about the same amount they take in fares. So then the rest of it has to be subsidies from the state and federal government.
Yeah, I think it even goes beyond the MBTA. I think there's just been a chronic lack of attention and lack of funding for all the transportation modes. And the pace also of attention to problems and solving the problems is maddeningly slow, not just for improving the transit system, but look at how long they've been discussing the interchange between 93 and 95 up in Woburn. I mean, you have 2 major interstates. I think it's 4 lanes in each direction coming together, and each exit ramp has a single lane. I mean, you talk about poor planning, and why it's taken so long to resolve that is just, it's mind-boggling. So at least now there seems to be a sense of urgency about some of these problems that we face. Last year there was a tremendous effort made on the Fast 14 project where 14 bridges in Medford were replaced in a matter of months, and I was hopeful that that would sort of jumpstart the whole mindset regarding, you know, how we can do this quickly, efficiently, under budget. And I'd like to see an accelerated transit program, an accelerated greenways program. Unfortunately, we seem to have kind of slowed down back to the pace that we're more accustomed to, but I'm hopeful that this outcry and this convergence of support around the T will really get people's attention, and people will contribute to solving these problems collectively. And I'm hopeful that's what will come of this.
You're hitting on what we've been talking about is what we think will be the solution to getting us out of this mess over the next year or two, which is looking at this as a statewide problem. Most people don't rely just on the T or just on the roads. People generally transfer between the two over time. The only way we're going to solve this, as we know, is if we get 81 votes in the House and 21 votes in the Senate. And how do we do that if we're just looking at the T's crisis when really the crisis is across the state for all the transportation modes?
Well, I think the real problem we're in this situation is that people have not been willing to spend money to keep our transportation system in a state of good repair. And the Transportation Finance Commission said that we had a $20 billion backlog of things to keep us, repair projects, just to keep us where we are. Because for many years we have not invested in keeping things in good shape. And so people are saying now, we have a $1 billion gap right now every year. Where's that going to come from?
Not the federal government.
Yeah. Well, I think
less and less.
Everyone that's affected needs to step up, because even if these fare increases are implemented, the T only gets about 1/3 of its revenue from fares, and that's going to be about the same. It's not going to jump up to 40 or 50 or 60% from the fare. So, and you mentioned
you could double it, but then people are not taking it as much, so you don't even get the value.
Correct. And you mentioned the organization A Better City. You know, there are institutions there that greatly benefit from mass transit. You know, not having to supply parking for their workers. Just having a more appealing work environment for people to get to and from work. So I think if every affected party, would be it the major institutions and employers in the region, if it would be the legislature, the cities and towns, the riders, I think if you spread it around and everybody contributes their portion, I think we can get to the bottom of this and provide the appropriate funding and make transportation the priority that we've suddenly realized it needs to be.
Well, I think we've done, in the last few years, there's been a lot of emphasis on trying to create jobs, make there be a good business climate so businesses will want to be here. And it seems to me that of all the things that government does that business needs, this is it. Education and transportation are the two infrastructure needs that businesses expect and require in order to locate here. And if we continue to let our infrastructure degrade, that will have a big effect on whether businesses want to come here.
When Governor Patrick was running for re-election, he often used the phrase generational responsibility. And I think that's a really key thing to keep in mind in this conversation, because when we think about what we have, the infrastructure that we have, it was built a generation ago or more. The Red Line cars, for example, mostly and more, the Red Line cars alone, most of them were built in the early 1970s, if not longer. And they have an amazing shop of mechanics that keeps those trains running. These trains that are ancient, that were never meant to last this long. That generation paid for this system that we're barely cobbling together and keeping intact now. And it is time for us, in our time right now, to pay forward and make sure that we have another generation of people that can benefit from the system, not just the individuals, but as you're saying, the businesses as well.
I think we also have to look forward to how our community is going to be evolving demographically over the next generation. We have an aging population that is going to want to remain active and be able to get to where they need to go in the region, and public transportation, trails and greenways, opportunities for people to get around without the use of a car is going to be very appealing and very much in demand. Also, the trend is for where in the past generation, a lot of people were moving away from the inner core city and nearby suburbs to look for a greener pasture elsewhere. They're finding that maybe that is not worth it, particularly if they have to commute, or as people have gotten older and they're empty nesters now, they're looking to get back closer to the city. because they want to be closer to the amenities that are offered there, and it's not worth being so far away, the expense, the hassle, et cetera. So there's going to be a continuing demand for this type of transportation service to knit together the greater Boston area. So I think we need to think 20 to 30 years ahead, not just the present
10,
crisis.
Because the fastest growing population, as I'm sure you know, is the people over 80. And a woman from AARP came to see me last week, and she said, "You told us we couldn't drive anymore when we were impaired." So, and then you're taking away the ride, and you're raising our passes, the cost of our passes. So there might be some pushback from older people and disabled people.
And for this proposal, there should be, because people have heard, oh, maybe the fares will go up 30% and 40%. Some people have said, okay, maybe I can afford that. Some people can, some people can't. But for people that get the senior discount pass or the disabled discounts, those are much more heavy impacts in terms of the increases going forward. So we're, right now I think we give seniors and disabled, it's a 30% discount, and that's going to go to a 50% discount, but of a much higher fare, and the impact is much worse for those populations and communities.
And then there are people who depend on the ride, and I think a lot of those people haven't found out yet what the effect will be of the premium service that will be required if you want it the same day, or if you're outside the 3/4 mile radius around.
And we're already seeing
service.
the impact in the ride. I was talking to a friend that works at one of the elder service agencies, and she was saying that in recent months, they can't recall more than a couple of people that have actually been approved for the ride. So they haven't even changed the budget yet. They haven't changed to the in-person application yet. But the ride has already been clamping down on their eligibility. So it's already getting harder and harder for people that need these services. They're already being denied.
Well, to some extent, that's going to happen,
Right.
because we have one of the most generous paratransit services in the country, and it costs about $40 every time somebody takes it. So we do need to both think about if everybody that's getting it is eligible, but also, are there other systems that would allow people to get around? And there are some communities that have found that offering people taxi vouchers is more efficient,
Right.
Cheaper, and
Preferable.
actually more yes, preferable and more reliable. So I think we do need to assess the ride and not just keep it. It's not going to stay the way it is.
That is true. And, you know, there's this cliche that out of crisis comes opportunity, and I think that is where we're at. We're definitely in a crisis, and it's trying to figure out how to mobilize this crisis into an opportunity so that it's not just another Band-Aid for another year to get us to the next deficit in the next fare increase discussion, but to actually look at, in this real crisis, how we can generate enough support and enough awareness statewide that this problem, this crisis is a statewide problem. It's the entire infrastructure network that's crumbling. It's the Longfellow Bridge falling into the Charles River. It's the bridges in the Berkshires and the Cape that are falling apart. It's the tunnels on the MBTA that are crumbling, and it's the local roads in a lot of cities and towns. All of that needs to be on the table.
Yeah, I think I-28 is about to fall down in Somerville. I think it's past the time that people felt certain, and it is falling a little bit by bit.
One other thing I would add about the service such as the ride, while it's very important and needed, part of the reason the ride is so badly needed is that the more broad transit system is not accessible as it should be. You can't get on for example, the commuter rail at West Medford if you're in a wheelchair. There's no handicap access. Getting on a bus is very problematic. I was on the 80 bus going to the Green Line meeting at Somerville High School a couple of weeks ago, and a person in a wheelchair got on. The driver had to stop the bus, put it in park, lower the ramp, let the patron on, get him assembled in the appropriate area, which is inconvenient for the passenger, obviously, who was also waiting at a stop that was very inefficient, and when it snows, it's rarely cleared and things like that. So the larger problem is that the system needs to be made more accessible for people of all abilities, so they can more easily use the
And I think a lot of
the
that
system.
is happening.
Slowly, but
I think the manager told us this week that 98% of the elevators and escalators are working at any one time, which he's very proud of. So that is part of accessibility also, is that if,
And it's actually one of the areas of the biggest investment at the T in the last couple of years, mainly because the disabled community filed a lawsuit and won,
yes.
Thankfully. And so now the T is investing a lot of money into upgrading stations. They mentioned the government center is the next one on deck to improve accessibility issues. And that's all good. But it also is in the context of the T not having enough money to do all of its needs, accessibility and basic repairs, never mind expansions and other enhancements that need to be done. So.
Well, that does bring up the question of the Green Line extension and whether people have said to me, well, how can you advocate expanding the T when it can't pay for what it's got?
Mm-hmm. Where should we start?
I'd like to hear what your all's perspective is.
A couple of things. First, one thing for the whole system, for all the system users to know, the Green Line Extension project does include enhancements that benefit all of the users of the system. Two things come to mind. One is the Green Line Extension includes purchasing new Green Line cars that will be benefiting the entire system, not just the extension segment.
And those cars are like 40 years old?
Ancient, very ancient. And then the second thing is a new maintenance facility and storage facility so that on the north side of the system they have a place to actually maintain and repair the cars, which saves the whole system money by not having to run the cars the whole length to go down to the south side to get repaired. So there are some benefits to the whole system. But at a very basic level, I think if we waited for there to be lots of money lying around to do transit, we'd be waiting a long time. And if the past generation said, we can't afford it, we wouldn't have what we have now. But we need to be looking forward and seeing what kind of system we need. Frankly, for the current generation, we needed this system 20 years ago to be expanded. But we can only do with what we have now, which is to keep pushing forward and expanding where the need is there. And this line has a huge ridership demand that will be immediately on board, paying fares and contributing to the system.
And not driving.
And not driving.
Yeah, it's a particularly underserved area. I view it more as an infill project of an underserved area that is not served by rail transit versus an expansion to maybe a more distant suburb or far-flung area where the demand clearly is there, the ridership is going to be there, and the benefits, as we talked about earlier, for people who don't even ride the Green Line will be there because people like me can walk to the Green Line as opposed to driving to Wellington to get the Orange Line or riding the 95 bus to Sullivan to get the Orange Line or the 94 to Davis. So, and also just pay one fare, be in the system, one seat ride. So there are numerous benefits there. And also the obligation of this Green Line extension is one borne by the Commonwealth and not the MBTA. Some people either aren't aware of that distinction or forget that, but it's not
or
going to...
Or they think the Commonwealth doesn't have the money either.
Well, the funding question still is somewhat up in the air, but it's still an extremely valuable project that will pay many dividends once it gets completed.
Well, I think it's interesting that people are not saying, well, don't widen 128 or don't widen other automobile programs or don't build parking. Well, some people say don't build parking garages, but
I said in my email newsletter or op-ed, when we talk about funding crisis in transportation, we never hear people saying shut down a few highway exit ramps or shut down this segment of Route 16 or shut down that local road to save money and let it go back to pasture. We don't do that for car traffic and for automobile access, but for some reason it seems okay to talk about shutting off people's lifeline when it comes to public transportation and ignoring the needs to build out. But we have a long list of highway projects that will be done and they'll continue to be on deck, and no one says we can't afford those, let's never do them, let's take them off the table. They all need to be on the table and prioritized. And over time, we have to figure out how to fund the whole set of needs.
We have built things that were unnecessary, or maybe not unnecessary, but less valuable than some of the things that have been put on hold. And we need to do a better job of prioritizing, in my opinion. But we don't even talk about flying. We don't say the airport's going to be closed 12 hours a day. We could do that. Planes are subsidized quite heavily as well.
Or the Mass Turnpike will be closed on the weekend.
That's a good, we hadn't thought of that.
Or, speaking of Massport, as another constituent that benefits greatly from the T services, whether it be the Silver Line buses, ferry service, Blue Line service, and they would be an agency that perhaps could help bear some of the costs, because they're a great beneficiary of the services that allow people to get to the airport and from the airport without the use of a car.
Well, that certainly is a simple solution for the ferry, for example, which benefits them exclusively, pretty much. Not exclusively, but a lot. Well, it benefits people in the port area, so that is a good reason to be able to ask them to pick that up rather than just shutting down the ferry.
And there are Silver Line and Blue Line costs that
That's
they could be bearing as well. We've heard estimates between $20 and $80 million what Massport could assume, and they can afford that. They're probably the only transit agency right now in the country, at least in Massachusetts, that is doing financially fairly well. They're talking about building more parking garages, and as a state, again, it's, we can have Massport build another parking garage at the airport, or we can make sure that we have a T that's actually serving the needs it's serving right now and not shutting down more.
So I think we picked one potential source of revenue, and so I think the main thing that I have learned from this process is how important transportation is and how much people value it. That people are saying it's worth it to have a system that works and is affordable and is accessible, and that it makes it clear that this is a value to people and to businesses, to everybody in the Commonwealth. So if nothing else, this crisis has shown us that, and maybe it will lead us to invest in the future development.
I think in the next year the question will be, do enough people statewide see that value enough to pay a little bit more in the gas tax or some other revenue stream that benefits the whole state with different transportation modes? And that's the debate.
And it may
we
be
see starting.
a variety of, it's probably not going to be all in the gas tax.
Right.
There may be some other, I think Ken mentioned asking some of the institutional players who don't pay taxes to contribute in some way, like requiring them to buy T-passes for all of their students, for example. I think we can find some ways to spread the costs, not just on the fare payers.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, thank you all for joining me.
Thank
Again,
you.
This is the Pat Jehlen Report, and thank you all for joining us tonight, and we'll see you again.